The issue of using frozen assets of the Russian Federation to support Ukraine has finally started to move forward. And if a final decision is made at the EU summit in December, then continuing the war against Ukraine will become more dangerous for Putin than making peace, which means there will be a real chance to force the aggressor to come to the negotiating table. Why is Moscow so afraid of losing these funds? How are they threatening in response? And what legal mechanism is the European Union proposing to provide Ukraine with a reparations loan? Let's break it down. Let's start by answering the question of exactly which Russian assets we're talking about. First and foremost, these are the central bank's foreign currency reserves, mainly bonds and securities, as well as funds belonging to private investors. They were kept in various countries: Belgium, the United States, Japan, the United Kingdom, Canada, and Switzerland. The decision to freeze the assets of the aggressor country was made soon after Russia launched its full-scale invasion of Ukraine. 2.5 years later, our partners decided to use the income from these assets to help Ukraine. And now, after lengthy discussions and difficult negotiations, the West has essentially come to the decision to use the assets themselves.
If we believe that Ukraine is our first line of defense, then we must increase military aid to Ukraine. However, we need a structural solution for such support. And that's exactly why I propose the idea of a reparations loan, which is based on immobilized Russian assets. This loan will not be issued as a single payment, but in tranches and with certain conditions. And we will strengthen our own defense industry by ensuring that part of the loan is used for purchases in Europe and with Europe. Ursula von der Leyen, President of the European Commission.
The European Commission proposes to use frozen Russian assets as collateral to provide Ukraine with a reparations loan. Kiev will repay these funds, but only after Russia pays reparations. According to various estimates, the loan amount could range from 130 to 140 billion euros. The final assessment must be made by the International Monetary Fund. For Putin, this is a clear message from Europe. We are ready to cover Ukraine's financial needs and will stand by Ukraine for as long as it takes.
The essence of the EU's proposal is to provide Ukraine with a loan from the monetary reserves that Euroclear transferred to the European Central Bank. According to the terms of the loan, Kiev will only have to repay the money if it receives war reparations from Moscow. At the moment, this seems unlikely. At the same time, European governments will provide Euroclear with a kind of promissory note, promising to pay it off if necessary. From a publication by the Washington Post.
The largest share of the aggressor country's frozen assets, about 185 billion euros, is held in the Belgian depository Euroclear. For a long time, the Belgian authorities were concerned about legal and financial risks. These are associated with any attempts to manage these funds outside of standard procedures. In addition, Belgium has an investment agreement with Russia that provides for arbitration in the event of a dispute between the parties. But after lengthy debates, Belgium agreed to consider the European Commission's proposal, albeit on the condition of strict guarantees and mutual risk-sharing among EU member states.
We have 3 requirements. I demand full reciprocity of risks because the risks are very high. We will suffer huge losses. So if we want to achieve this, we will have to act together. We want guarantees that if the money has to be returned, each member state will contribute its share. Belgium cannot bear the consequences alone. And the third requirement is that every country where assets are frozen must act together with us.
The process is also being delayed due to strong resistance from Hungary and Slovakia. For example, Robert Fico says that using Russian assets to help Ukraine could lead to international lawsuits and undermine trust in the European financial system. Meanwhile, Viktor Orban warns that such a move would trigger an economic and political war between Europe and Russia. But on the main point, that the aggressor should pay for all the deaths and destruction in Ukraine, and that if Putin isn't stopped, the risks for Europe will be completely different. Both of them are strangely silent.
There's a new miracle weapon from Brussels, seizing and using the Russian Federation's currency reserves in Europe. This is a Russian-European conflict. Could even become a prelude to war. The only way to prevent escalation is direct Russian-European negotiations. We have insisted on this during meetings over the past few days. Viktor Orban, Prime Minister of Hungary, Facebook.
The Kremlin viewed the central bank's currency reserves as a financial safety cushion that could be used to stabilize the economy and the ruble's exchange rate during times of crisis. Right now, the aggressor country's economy increasingly resembles a horse that's been run into the ground. Sanctions, the impact of strikes on oil refineries, a shortage of labor and technology, as well as a lack of investment. The Russian state has long been spending more than it earns. And without access to funds in foreign accounts, the budget deficit will only continue to grow. And if the European Union countries decide to approve a reparations loan for Ukraine, it will send a signal to Putin that Moscow will not win a war of attrition.
If we make this decision regarding the assets, no one will be able to reverse it later. No matter what changes, no matter what the policies of future G7 leaders are, whoever comes to power won't be able to reverse the decision once Ukraine starts receiving these funds in installments and decides where they will go, whether for weapons or something else. This is our political victory. God willing, they will move from political decisions to actually putting this into practice. They're very close. Volodymyr Zelensky, president of Ukraine, at a meeting with journalists.
Moscow, of course, is threatening retaliatory measures if Brussels decides to use frozen Russian assets to support Ukraine. The Kremlin is promising lawsuits and the nationalization of Western companies that haven't managed to leave the Russian market in time. In practice, this kind of policy has already been implemented in Russia for quite some time. Large-scale nationalization began back in 2022. In reality, it's more like a typical redistribution of property in favor of Putin's inner circle. Formally, the decisions are processed through the courts. Any made-up pretext will do, and the verdict is ready. Confiscation without the right to appeal. More and more often, the reason for property seizure is a foreign passport or real estate abroad. And both foreign and Russian entrepreneurs who don't show complete loyalty to the Kremlin's policies are targeted.
Since the start of the full-scale invasion of Ukraine, the Prosecutor General's office has filed 145 lawsuits to seize private businesses in favor of the state, totaling 4.5 trillion rubles. In almost half of the cases, the assets remain under direct state ownership. Among those who receive the confiscated assets are almost exclusively people from Putin's inner circle. The Kovalchuks, the Rotenbergs, major state companies like VTB or Gazprom, almost all of them come from the Ozero Cooperative and are among the potential beneficiaries of businesses already seized through prosecutors' lawsuits. From a publication by Novaya Gazeta, Europe.
No matter how loud the Kremlin's threats are, there is no longer any way to avoid paying the price for the war unleashed against Ukraine. Using frozen Russian assets to help Ukraine is not just a financial measure, but a matter of basic justice. And it's important that Kiev's partners are acting in a coordinated way, joining forces against the aggressor. Along with sanctions and arms supplies to Ukraine, this strategy is consistently depriving Russia of the resources it needs to continue the war.